At the DLN, we love a self-introduction. We don't like to read long, boring bios. So we're going to go around and just ask, each of you to tell us a little bit about your background, your business, and what brought you to the world of hospitality. Let's start with you, Ari.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Ari Heckman from Ash. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ash. We are a little bit of a strange bird of a company. We're sort of vertically integrated hospitality company, as we've sort of rebranded ourselves recently. We design, own, and operate our hotels. We have 5 around the country that are operating now, a 6th that's opening in Richmond, Virginia later this year, and a 7th and 8th in the pipeline that I can't speak about quite yet, but hopefully you'll hear about them soon. The way that I got into hospitality, and particularly into this sort of vertically integrated world of hospitality, I was always a sort of frustrated creative and sort of balancing my left brain and right brain, and I loved the idea of sort of using design to create value, both for clients and for myself and for my team. At some point, we sort of stopped doing client work and focusing on our own projects completely. And we bought a building in Providence, Rhode Island, that's my hometown, that was, when we bought it, a brothel and a strip club. And we were like, what do we do with this building? It was very opportunistic. All of my mentors in real estate had said to sort of stay away from hotels. They're an operating business, very different asset class. But this building just needed to be a hotel. The way it was set up, it had 60 rooms and 60 bathrooms. Long story short, we took the leap and created a hotel out of it, which was, I love travel, I love spaces, I loved the stories that come with a hotel and all the touch points. And that was the first thing that set us off. And here we are, 10 years from the opening of that hotel, opening our 6th this year.
Brilliant. Giancarlo?
I am Giancarlo Valle, founder of a very small design practice in New York City, actually not that far, in Tribeca, right at the intersection of Tribeca and Chinatown. And we're 12-person design company, really looking at architecture, interiors, and the decorative arts. So it's been kind of a personal journey for me. I studied classically architecture for a decade, working for a decade, and then getting into interiors partly out of my own interest and passion for understanding how people live. So it started with my own apartment as a sort of hobby, and then slowly transitioned and felt like there was an opportunity to learn more about how about a more sort of human element that was missing for me. So it wasn't a typical path, but more of a reaction against what I had been doing to date, and really saw a more holistic version. So I would say that our studios sort of sees design through the lens of architecture, but more as a way of thinking than through the sort of framework of it.
Brilliant. Leigh?
So Leigh Salem. We have a studio post company. We're based down in Gowanus. We're around 25 now, and we've been working together since 2012. And I'm trying to go back here in terms of how we all kind of came together. But I too came from the architecture world, and I originally met my partners through friends of friends, and one actually the first day of architecture school. So we sort of cut our teeth together with that sort of naivete and ambition. But we had the opportunity to go and all sort of work in different different sort of parts of architecture, and obviously the industry is vast and very different in terms of how you can carve your path. But I think when we started, we sort of thought about our studio, and today it feels less so, but very much a bit of a irreverent act. It was like a defiant act for us, and it was to take the sort of architectural approach, but frame it for what we were really interested in at the time was how interiors and particular hospitality frames how it allows for you to speak to more cultural aspects. So, we were super interested in music programming at the time, and the opportunity of actually curating artists and commissioning artists from the start of the design process, and very few typologies or components of our industry allowed for that sort of involvement and with artistic sort of endeavors. And so we sort of fell into hospitality in a way to scratch that itch, right, of this sort of multifaceted design. And now, we still, that's sort of our main focus is that boutique hospitality component. But I was just talking to Ari about it, is we found, for us, we really have to constantly be shifting scale. And so, as much as we love doing a full sort of world of a boutique hotel, we also love that opportunity to design a really small restaurant in the West Village. And what that does is, conceptually, and we can talk about this, but it really allows for us to explore things very cohesively and with intent, and almost like a jewel box, right? Operating at a very small square footage and do that to the sort of level of resolution that always resonates with us. So we're always sort of chasing that initial thing that I think brought our studio into that ethos of sort of multicultural sort of inputs within the space.
And what I love about you guys as a group is that all of you in your businesses are staking new ground. I mean, whether it's your vertically integrated approach, Ari, or the interdisciplinarity and the shifts in scale that both of you practice, you're not taking anything for granted in terms of how you're moving forward creatively or in terms of how you structure a business to help you realize that creative path that you're on. So there's a lot in this discussion that we'll be picking up on as we move along. But before we kind of get specific and talk about your operations and specific projects, I just wanted to start by framing the boutique hotel movement, which is about 40 years old now. We've had Richard Bourne with us today, an OG, so brilliant. And he was also talking not just about his own projects, but about the way the boutique sort of segment has segmented. And you have super luxury projects, you have sort of niche projects. What constitutes a great boutique hotel has maybe changed. I think there was a moment when it was about the introduction of nightlife and novel F&B. There was a moment when it was about integrating high design. And there has been, sort of further development in the last decade with this increasingly blurry line between residential and hospitality, meaning that, boutique hotels are informing residential environments, they're continuing to be informed by them, et cetera. So to your mind, what defines the best and most interesting projects today in this space? And you can talk about your own, or you could talk about just qualities that you love to see in a great boutique hotel project. Ari?
That's a tough question. I think, some of the things that I love today are probably the reasons why, the movement was sort of first born 40 years ago. And I think it's important to qualify, at least in my opinion, the 40-year mark is maybe when we consider sort of boutique lifestyle hospitality in the US, but it's been going on far longer in other parts of the world.
Absolutely.
We are kind of constantly, endlessly looking abroad, particularly to Europe, somewhat to Japan, for inspiration of sort of like generational hospitality that really, was kind of defined by this like very family-owned business where the experience was so personal. And I think one of the reasons why I am so drawn to creating hotels and love hotels as a consumer is for that, complete immersive experience. One of the reasons why I wanted to design the hotels that I develop and also operate them is because I'm a control freak, and I want to have the ability to touch every touch point on property, whether it's a postcard or a coaster or the playlist or the ongoing cultural programming. But without rambling too far, I would say for me, still the most exciting thing is the thing that made these properties interesting in the first place, which is that sense of like soul and authenticity, which is a little bit of an overused buzzword, that makes that a sort of irreplaceable experience. We all know you can get 5, 6, 7-star hospitality at a very expensive hotel, but you might not get the sort of keys to the city or the neighborhood or the place that you want to be exploring. For me, that's luxury.
And I think that you've been successful in connecting with an audience who really gets that, right? Your properties are renowned for their narrative-driven quality. You feel like you're stepping into a story. And, I kind of wonder with such specific parameters being placed around each project, they're so contextually specific. How do you kind of operationalize that approach in your business? Is each project like starting over again, or do they sort of evolve from project to project?
I'd say it's, ask me that in like 5 years. It's a work in progress. It's really, really hard. A hotel is open 24 hours a day. We often talk about it like sort of casting a play, when every single person in the building is sort of a member of the cast, whether they're on a team, a guest, et cetera. And so you kind of want to sort of art direct the way everyone is sort of looking and feeling and experiencing the space, while also obviously leaving room for all the crazy, creative, interesting, scandalous things that happen in hotels. So, it's a little bit of like federalism, I call it, like where we have the sort of like, corporate guidelines that we want consistency across all our properties that are non-negotiables, but also leave room on property for, innovation and really site-specific sort of characters to come through.
Yeah, your properties convey a sense of delight and surprise. So you sense the control, I think, and the brand integrity, but you also feel that life can come through.
I hope so.
Now, Leigh, in your practice, I know that you're very concerned with context as well, and being sort of, contextually specific to the location, but you don't take local themes for granted, and the work feels highly original. So how do you, when going to new environments, sort of take stock of where you are and begin building the narrative for your work?
Yeah, it's always interesting because when we talk about context, and for us, it's trying to find that starting point. But as we sit here in New York, like, and you think about the hotels that we love and we all are drawn to, they're usually they don't feel necessarily of New York, right? So I think that this idea that hospitality should mimic or exaggerate the surroundings that we know, I think is a dangerous sort of, and frankly, a bit boring approach. For us, when we're designing a lot of our properties, we're not from there. So it'd be incredibly insincere to try to make something that is reflective of that community and solely so. For us, it's really finding that sort of architectural vernacular or those starting points to build upon, right? So we start, that might be materially, that might be an architectural history that we need to use as sort of that starting for massing or exploration of those designs. But unless, for us, like the idea of building something contextually is finding something that we feel fits within the needs or within sort of a interesting cultural opportunity, right? Really to give something that's maybe missing, or to think about sharing a history that has sort of fallen away. But rarely are we trying to say like this is, and you're going back to this idea of authenticity, which is tough and dangerous in terms of the idea of trying to say, hey, this is of this place. It's really to try to find that starting point to tell and commit to a concept. And so for us, what our sort of testing and the places we love, I think express a true commitment to that narrative, right? It like holistically. And I think for contextually starting point and make sure it makes sense is important, but hopefully we're taking it something new that doesn't feel like it's just of that certain geographic location.
And Giancarlo, this is a great seg to the work that you do, because the majority of your work in the past has been in residential, but you've made this incredible debut in the world of hospitality with a couple of projects that we've all seen and appreciated over the last year. And craft, as in your residential interiors, is key to those projects. It really, is evident that your passion for commissioning and sourcing amazing local craft is a huge part of what you're doing in these projects. Could you tell us about that and how you're connecting to context in that sense?
Yeah, it's interesting because for us and for me personally, hospitality is new. I mean, it's sort of a new frontier, but sort of an evolution of where we are as a studio in terms of how we approach furniture, decorative arts, and architecture. So it was sort of the next progression, but hadn't really had an opportunity to work on something at that scale. And we kind of lucked out in that our first hospitality project was kind of a pet project for our first client that we had done 5 homes for in the past. So it was a very, I feel like we had a leg up in the process, and obviously the trust building, which is, it's hard to sort of jump into a project and establish that sort of language, that common language with the client. So for us, we had that, and then we were able to kind of push that forward, and so that the project that we finished in Mexico was really an extension of the way this particular client, which is the host of the very small hotel, wanted to live. So that it was really him welcoming people into his home, and that you could experience a part of that. So for us, that was like the perfect sort of starting point and kind of low risk proposition.
Low risk on the client side, but the scale was pretty impressive. Operationally, how did you take all of that care and customization that you're known for into a space of that scale?
I mean, a lot of it was reverse engineered, I would say. We had a timeline, and we had an incredible team locally that we were able to work with. So everything was sourced locally. The rugs were from Oaxaca, all the stone was from the Yucatan, all the furniture was made in Playa del Carmen. And that, we were like, what can we do and what materials make sense in this particular climate, and work from there. So all the design solutions were based off of what we could and couldn't do there. So we were sort of rewriting the way we work. But at that point, we hadn't done anything at this scale, so it was kind of perfect for us to cut our teeth on.
And has that inflected your residential work since you started developing this hospitality practice?
I think it has. They feed each other. The craft element, I think you have to be open in how you work, because I think as a designer, you want to have that element of surprise, and how do you build that into the design process, which is difficult because the process is so long and methodical, especially with architecture. You're doing this plan, you're planning it for a while, but how do you create improvised moments that keep you stimulated personally and within the studio? So I think a lot of what we do is about developing our own internal processes. And we do that through a lot of like physical model making, creating our own sort of inputs, and almost create our own little source guide internally to sort of keep that process moving.
So you have a very interdisciplinary team, and I think you do too, Leigh and Ari. I mean, everybody here is very interdisciplinary and has sort of integrated teams. Could you tell us a little more about how that functions in your business?
Yeah, I mean, I also want to say, you can really tell in the work, in your work like that, so you can tell in the shape of some of the pieces you make, like you can see that love of that and surprising yourself. I think it's just it's very clear in what you guys do. It's really wonderful. But for us, I think from a team structure, we've tried to find people who are equally constantly interested in working across scale and approach, right? And people have always said, yeah, look, I've come from an architecture background, but I'm really interested in product design. Like, we love hearing those types of declarations, because they just inform, if you have the opportunity, they're going to take that and really play on that. And so for us, we don't break the studio down to architecture, FF&E, product. There's no definitive design roles within it. It's really you're operating within the design of the studio. And so you work across projects, across scale, and while I think we're still maybe naive or idealistic in that idea, that we like people to work through that. We do think those things inform each other, right? And that taking an architectural framework or rigor and applying that to a bench or a way a joint works, I think is wonderful. I mean, it's slower potentially in terms of its development, but that sort of multidisciplinary thing, it does keep it all. It's a way of building in sort of a fresh perspective within the work, and so hopefully, we like to think our studio is that opportunity for people to explore those different avenues, right, and see what resonates with them personally.
And I think it shows in the work. I think it does. Ari, what about Ash?
I often say, like, the fights happen inside the family because we are our own client. Our creative team is working very close with our development team and our operating team. I was on a call right before I came in here, sort of moderating, which is a lot of what I do, between our brand team, our culinary team, our operations team, and our creative team for a new food and beverage space where, everyone understands the objective and everyone's on the same team and has a shared vision, but then, there's always these sort of like micro conflicts that you need to figure out, okay, this is what we want to achieve from a creative perspective, but are we able to operationalize this? Like, how is this going to contribute to our cost of labor in a space, which is obviously very important and keeps the lights on and keeps people paid. So I'd say our sort of like, where interdisciplinary sort of practice comes to me most often is sort of on the operation side. How do you operate a space day in and day out that you have also designed? Because we all have to go to work together every day. No one can say, oh, we did that project 2 years ago, it's all forgotten. We work together on an ongoing basis. So you kind of have to build that into your process at all times.
Yeah, and I think this is a good moment to really acknowledge that you're an owner and an operator and obviously a frustrated creative, which we love. The DLN is full of those. I'm one. And so you have a clear view onto so many different areas because you yourself are so interdisciplinary. Let's think about the economics of this model of smaller hotels for a second. Would Ash go larger if it could in terms of the scale of the business or property? Do you want to stay small? What's the dynamic there?
Our cadence has been sort of opening one hotel every 2 years. So, 10 years into it, 5 hotels operating, a 6th one opening. Our next hotel after the one that's opening is 160 keys, which is about 60 rooms larger than our largest hotel now, 50 keys. So the answer is yes, with the caveat that we never want to grow for growth's sake. We don't have institutional partners. We don't have anyone saying you have to grow to meet this financial objective. I think we want to, every time we open a hotel, I think we get a little bit better at it. And part of our sort of like special sauce has been coming from a place of naivete. Like, we don't actually know what we're doing in any sense from a design or operations perspective. And I actually think that's why we've been able to attract some attention and some fans, is because we're not playing from a playbook that's already been established, which sometimes works for us.
No, I think the lesson here is be naive, be defiant, and don't always go for efficiency. I mean, sometimes the longer route is the most successful one. Giancarlo, as you move on to other hospitality projects and take on other clients, what are you thinking about in terms of the scale you want to work at? And I would extend the same to you, Leigh, also pointing out that you mentioned to me that some of your hospitality clients have drawn you into residential. So what's the future hold in that sense?
I think you have to have that blend. I mean, we're a very small, we're 12-person design studio. And to some extent, we like that scale right now. We recently opened a small gallery for our furniture, which has been really nice because it's an extension of the studio. We can kind of play around with it, but it's a ground floor space, so it's allowed us to sort of be able to tell stories at a bigger scale and be able to invite people in. And I've found that the feedback loop on that with that space has been tremendous. I mean, we've been open a month,
but we've been thinking space
about it
at
for
50
a while.
Lispenard Street.
50 Lispenard, yeah. So a block from our studio.
And you all three create a lot of product. So how does that fit into this? Because it feels like your properties are total environments. There may be some control freaks on the panel, but also visionaries, and product factors into that. So what does that mean to you guys?
Yeah, on the product side, it's really a continuation of what we're. It's hard to break out the sort of idea from where it starts, right? It starts at a project, or are we working on something that sort of naturally feeds into a project? And I think we always have these these interests sort of flowing through the studio, and maybe it's materially, maybe it's sort of how something's sort of more monolithic and playing with these ideas. And usually what we found, I mean, the difference between, often our interiors work and our products is you get the chance with her product is to iterate. And maybe too much so, but right, you're iterating, you have to iterate that number of times before you can confidently bring that to market. And I think so for us, once we have that sort of idea, but it really takes, sometimes a kernel of that might live in a project, and then the fifth iteration will then become something that we're actually making and working with a partner and developing that as a piece of furniture. But it's really that sort of iterative process that taking that away from the timeline of a project that allows us to do, and that's super. It's amazing to be able to tweak at that scale until you get it to the point where you're really comfortable and feel confident, and that's the right expression.
Does that residential work you were describing factor into that product conversation as a laboratory or a space that you can work in?
It does. I mean,
way?
it's going back to, Giancarlo mentioned sort of coming from a residential perspective into hospitality and building that trust. And I think we've had similar experience going the other way, in that we'll have either clients or people who've experienced our hospitality or hotel, and then be interested in how we might approach a home, and through that context or through that idea of what is it, their home, can it be a place that is exploring things or forces them to think about things differently? And so it's usually just, for us, having that trust is amazing to be able to work through it. But it always becomes just so much more intimate, right, at the residential. And that's the opportunity to work with beautiful, true vintage pieces that are, and use that as a cornerstone to a room, build a room around a piece, right? And that's a very tough thing to do in a hospitality setting.
Although this guy does a bit of that, and I've seen souvenirs on your website, including some I'd like to buy myself.
Happy to gift
Tell
you
us
one.
about it.
Yeah, I mean, our sort of product side is manifested in two ways, or sort of came about in two ways. One is there's sort of a sunk cost element to it. We're already creating either pieces of furniture that we design for hotel projects, or collateral, literal souvenirs that people buy when they visit a hotel. So we just sort of saw enough organic demand from people who were not just visiting our hotels to say, hey, can I purchase that? You get so many emails, you're like, okay, maybe we should do this. And then sort of secondarily, because our hotels are, in markets that are not New York or LA, but a lot of our sort of like brand fans, for lack of a better term, we wanted to give a way for people to sort of interact with and buy into the brand, who are not necessarily finding themselves in Baltimore or New Orleans or Detroit. So that was really the objective.
Yeah. An entry point and a souvenir.
Yes.
Do you think of it as a lifestyle, or is that word too hackneyed to associate with your cool brand?
No, I think if people think of it as lifestyle, it's flattering. We want to sort of invest more in creating that sort of 360 multi-dimensional world. We're just sort of we've made our own personal care for the hotels pretty much since the beginning, but we're only now kind of selling it to the public. So that's sort of a next extension of sort of you can smell like ash too.
Literally and figuratively.
Yes, yeah.
So, I think if we kind of begin wrapping all of this up, we're talking about an approach to design and to experience. It's very personal. It's not always efficient. You're taking the long route. But what I love is that, it's not about getting that shot for Instagram, as in terms of the visitors at your properties. You're creating rich, layered, nuanced experiences, and it sounds like your practices are the same way. Do you think that experience is what constitutes luxury now? Like, is this is this the zeitgeist that we're in, that we're not necessarily, or that a segment of buyers and visitors isn't that concerned with the trappings of luxury, but they want something deeper and richer and less about the image and more about the way they live? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely. I think, particularly, and I'm guilty of this as well, like when you find a space or go to a space that is sort of rarefied and not that many other people, have gone to or have had the privilege to find, and you put that out into the world, you're signaling something that is like, I am a tastemaker, I've discovered this, I'm here. So I do think in this sort of like hyper visual, social connected world, that is a form of luxury, it's a form of cachet, it's a form of status, all of those things. And I imagine that's going to only become more so.
And how do you, you were talking a little bit about the culture of the properties. How do you kind of foster that beyond trying to apply the middle path between order and chaos?
Yeah, I mean, it's still a work in progress for sure. I'd say one of the things that I've sort of recently been saying is, getting away from, casting or hiring people on property who have just come from a hospitality background, and really going and finding people who are in the community, who are, good hosts themselves, and kind of training them on the nuts and bolts hospitality things. Those tend to be kind of our best brand ambassadors, and I really think that is the connection at a hotel where you're like, okay, this place is of the place. Because I completely agree with Leigh. It's like we are carpetbaggers. We're coming into markets where we're not from and we don't live, and it's very hollow to say we're creating recreating the vernacular of a place. I look at these hotels as like completely new fantasy creations, more like making a film or a piece of art or something.
And Leigh, you've talked about this in your practice. Could you share more?
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say that going back to the original, when you're sort of tracing back the original concept of the boutique hotel too. I think you guys have been so passionately. In New Orleans, right? It's such an incredible, cohesive design, and not just design, but truly like the experience and what you're saying there, that you've created sort of this very clear pocket of that will endure, right? And I think that the big difference that I think, or the properties that are interesting to us too, are those that they're not of trend, right? And they're so confident in their own expression that they will become these enduring institutions at that scale that they exist. And I think it's the collection. I think each hotel is so different but you can see that commitment, that confidence in each one. So I think it's phenomenal. Yeah.
And he's his own client, but you've talked about how in trying to create something indelible with your clients, you'll have a conversation about how the environment you're developing will relate to their sort of operations moving forward. And you want to make sure that there's a good fit so that experience becomes something lasting.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot. I mean, the fact that you guys have to live with your decisions for years, right? That accountability and responsibility is something that I can't imagine. But often we try to ask those questions we probably have no business asking, and trying to really understand what people, not to say what people are, but what's really going to drive that property and who is going to be behind it? Because I think for all of us can sense that the people behind properties now, there's enough origin storytelling, literally, of how things came about, that you want to feel that in the property. And so for us, we may be the interior designer, but we're really trying to understand from a business and from an operational standpoint how this is going to work, so that we can design something with enough density and intensity that it actually is saying something to that point. And so, we're constantly trying to mine and really trying to understand those constraints, so that we're not, frankly, designing something that can't be fulfilled every hour of the day, or it's going to fall flat. And so it's super important to get that straight from the beginning.
And once again, we return to holistic thinking, right? Not just designing and then leaving, but really thinking in the long term. So before we wrap up, I'm going to skip my question about what's next for boutique hotel design in general. We just want to hear from you. What's next in your practice? What is the project, the idea, the challenge that you're most excited about tackling? Starting with you, Giancarlo.
That's a good question.
You could just...
We we're looking at, I mean, hospitality's been the sort of next logical step for us, but we have to do it within a scale that makes sense with our company, and you know, we want to do things that are a natural fit. We just started a project in the Bahamas that is going to be another. It's a lengthy project, but we're excited about it because it's still small. Feels like the right scale for us, but the storytelling element and the idea that it fits into our body of work that can sort of build on previous projects seemed like a good fit.
I want to clarify that when he says small, they had a village of 200 people working to develop your property in Mexico, right? I mean, you developed the production on site for almost everything you used. So this guy's modest. These are all modest guys. Ari, what are you excited about?
I was sort of saying this to Peter before. You know, one of our main objectives is we created all these individual properties that have their own brands. You know, all obviously made by Ash, and I think what we're working on now is a way to sort of, you know, bring the Ash universe more threaded into the properties from a brand and sort of recognition perspective without diluting or losing the sort of magic that comes from these individual properties, which is it's a tough challenge. I think we're up for it, but that's sort of one of the main objectives in the coming year.
Great. And Leigh?
Yeah, and for us, it's we will continue to. I think for us, it's really finding the right scale projects that we can do. Really, every inch of it. Really, I think that's the stuff that we get really excited about. Those opportunities to touch every corner and really look at something in every manner. And so that might be something very small. It could be. Or it could be the right size project, but it's just the way it's structured. It might be phased, right? It might be that it's done, and it's not that it's just having the ability to do things in a way that's really considered. The projects that for us we're super excited about it, and I think for residential is becoming. It's not going to be our main sort of approach, but it's that sort of vacation, that little break where you can do that in a really intentful manner. So. That's exciting to us.
Great words to end on, and I love that word considered. I think that's the through line in what we've been discussing. Everything you guys do is considered, and if this is the zeitgeist, sign me up. We love what you're doing. This is the future of boutique hotel design, and maybe just design in general. So thank you guys for joining us today and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.